Hello, BookTube. Well, after quite a delay that will not be noticeable when you're looking at these videos in the future in a playlist, we are returning to the 100 greatest books of all time. And we are starting, I'm not sure of the numbers here, but we'll just do 10. We'll do the next 10, and I'll number them in the video title. We're starting with a little book that needs no introduction. Some of these will need introductions, but this one doesn't. The Metamorphosis by Kafka. This has been translated a million times. I chose this particular cover, the Susan Bernofsky translation, not only because I really like her translation, but also because that cover design is just about the most brilliant thing I've ever seen. The title of the book is in the shape of a giant vermin, a giant bug. Of course, that's what this story is. The main character of this story wakes up one morning and finds that he has become a giant bug. It is not metaphorical. He is actually vermin. He is not human anymore. And it is an endurably strange book. It'll take you an hour to read, but you'll be wrestling with it for your whole life. It's an endurably strange book. So it gets on there, even though it's very, very small. Then we'll move on to something that comes up often in greatest books of all time lists, certainly on mine, although not all of it. Keep in mind, I've mentioned in a few installments here that not every entry in every segment of this list is a perfect book. I would argue that The Metamorphosis by Kafka is pretty much a perfect book. But this one is not. This is Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes. And this is, again, it needs no introduction. The story of Don Quixote is famous, and an addle-pated old gentleman who's so ruined by reading that he becomes a questing knight in a world that doesn't have such things and that thinks he's crazy. This is the Edith Grossman translation. This is the best English translation. The same. I know that I mentioned Susan Bernofsky and Edith Grossman. They're both great translations, but my same precept applies in all of these things. I think pretty much every book on this list is translated. My same precept applies, which is my opinion of how good the translation is, or anybody's opinion, shouldn't matter. It should be how well you get along with the translator. Do you get along with the translator? If you do, then that is the translation for you. And you can get around to the other translations later. I think that this translation is wonderful, so that's, of course, not the drawback of this book. The imperfection here is that the first half of this book is infinitely better than the second half. And they're always in the same book. That's why it's so big. So be prepared for a little bit of organic disharmony. Then we have, next we have a poet, one of a couple of poets on the list this time around. This is the Roman poet Catullus, whose work almost did not reach us. So I have the cover to the Penguin Classic edition here. Really, again, it's just translation. You want to make sure you pick a translator who works for you. Like, for instance, if you would go to the secondhand market, Amazon or eBay or whatnot, Penguin once upon a time did a collection of books that gives you a broad range of different translations over time. You could use that. There's a volume for Catullus. You could use that to figure out what kind of translator you like. Or just go to your local bookstore. If it's a good one, they might have 2 or 3 different editions of Catullus. Probably not, but you never know. But the miracle is that we have anything to translate at all. Catullus's poems are amazing. They are absolutely amazing. They barely reached us, and they are 2,000 years old, but they are as alive as any poetry that you've ever read. And the more, if you don't know Latin, if you have no Latin, the more of that life you will perceive is dependent on the translator. So here it might make a difference, but it's going to be up to you to go hunting for them. But it's amazing what he does. It's amazing what he does with what even in his own day was the stale mechanics of love poetry. Then we have another work in translation if you are an English monoglot reader. This is Goethe's Faust. And this suffers from the same problem as Don Quixote, which is that this is typically presented in 2 parts. And the first part is far, far better than the second part. The second part doesn't really have any reason for being. The first part does, and again, you don't need the introduction, a famous story about a man who's willing to sell his soul to the devil for the heights of forbidden knowledge. and what that means. Goethe is under, I believe, complete control of his subject matter in the first part of Faust, and then in the second part, a very Teutonic teariness starts to creep in around the edges, and also a Teutonic bloated wordiness. You got to watch out for that. You got to watch out for that, our friends, the Germans. Then we move to China from a few centuries ago. This is one of the stereotypical 5 great novels of China. This is The Scholars. It doesn't have any modern translations. It should. It's crazy that it doesn't. It's crazy that it doesn't. It's crazy that it's been so long since there was a new translation, a popular translation of the poems of Catullus. That's just nuts. How long has it been since there was a big review phenomenon translation of Goethe's Faust Part 1? These things would sell, and they'd be reviewed everywhere. They would have loyal readers. I don't know. It's just a steady market. And you don't have to buy it. You don't have to take the author out for scallops and cocaine. This, of all of the great Chinese novels, this is, I think, the strangest. It's definitely my favorite. It's the funniest and the most human. Certainly the most 21st century disillusioned and wry and cynical about people in China's vast civil exam ecosystem. You're from a very small village. You work really hard because if you can qualify in your regionals to sit for a slightly more prestigious civil service exam, well, you might win it. And what happens then? It seems tiny to us now, but it was a huge road to improvement, economic and social, at the time. And the author of this book rips it to shreds. He just tears that whole system to shreds. I think the last English language translation of this that I read was 35 years ago. And the humor creaked. And everyone that I know who has ever told me about this book, who knows the original, has said that the humor doesn't creak. That the book is cuttingly, woundingly brilliant and funny. I have never read a translation of this that was that, so it needs a new one. But it's still great. Then we can stick with, we can go to poetry. This is a great poet. In his own way, he is every bit as great as Catullus, although his obvious comparison is with Horace. This is Tu or Du Fu, however the orthographics are rendered and whatever the fad is at the moment. He has many, many editions of poetry. Just want to make sure to look for the right person. It could be Tu Fu, it could be Du Fu, but Penguin has a volume of him. There are many other volumes of him. There was just recently, just a few years ago, a very good book called A Life in Poetry that had a lot of the poems. And his poems are wonderful. They are wonderful. They are so small in terms of their focus, but they're so big in terms of the heart behind them. The big heart behind them is in part a cultural stereotype, a Falstaffian type figure that we need not think was actually the poet. But they're brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Again, you want to be careful. You want to just look for the right translation, the one that works for you. Then we move back to Sophocles. This is his Antigone. No idea about this cover. These pre-Raphaelite covers are always a mystery to me. But this is a story of a young woman who faces off against the power of the state. The apparently impersonal power of the state that originally forbids her to bury the corpse of her brother. It's supposed to be left out in the wilderness for the dogs and the kites. She can't stand that. Antigone can't stand that ruling. And what follows it's pretty static. It's mostly just talking. But it is so good. It is so good. And in a way, I wouldn't belabor it too much, but in a way, it raises questions that are absolutely pertinent today. They've been pertinent all along. What is the individual's relationship to the state? What can the state legitimately and illegitimately order an individual to do or not do? And it's tense. Really, really tense. So then we have an epic. This is also in translation. I'm pointing you to the Royal Tyler translation, which is easily the best one into English. This is the Tale of the Heike, with a very angry gentleman brushing snow. I even think that it doesn't seem very martial, does it? But this is a big Iliad-type story, a big Mahabharata type story of warring clans and contrasting characters and characters who do evil things, but we are not permitted to think of them as evil. They are too complex for that. You see this in the great military epics, and that's what this is. There's some awful brutality in here, but gorgeous imagery as well, and Royal Tyler does a fantastic job with it. He would be familiar to some of you for his Penguin Classic Deluxe translation of The Tale of Genji. And this is, in many ways, a companion piece to that. I strongly, strongly recommend it. It's not nearly as inviting as The Tale of Genji, initially. But boy, will it grip you. then we have an author named Ludwig Renn. This is his book, Krieg, his novel called War, which is, in my mind, the best novel that has ever been written about World War I. Huge number of novels have been written about World War I. A lot of them are really, really good. This one, I think, is the best of them all. It's the most unsettling. It's the most visceral, drawn in large part from the author's own experiences, but he mutates them and draws on a lot of other people's experiences too and works them all in here. It's indelible. There are scenes in here that will stick with you forever, no matter how familiar you are with war literature. And then we started with Kafka in Prague. We will return to Prague to finish out this segment of the 100 best books ever written with the Duino Elegies by Rilke, which is a collection of poems that is just heart-rendingly beautiful. Just amazingly beautiful. You can't say that about Catullus. When he wants to be beautiful, he can. But he often has other things in mind than being beautiful. Very often he does. He conveys those perfectly, but it's not beautiful poetry when he's doing that, except the beauty of the skill he uses in manipulating the Latin language. This is almost pure beauty. Again, the Teutonic tearfulness is definitely present. What can you say? It's the way the Germans write their great books. They in the 18th and 19th and 20th century, they wrote great books, great works of history, great works of philosophy, great works of poetry, great works of fiction. And in those works, those great works of drama, in those works, they got a little sappy and a little teary. And every single time they do the same thing. They put down their writing quill, they daub the tears from their eyes, they get up from their table, and they embroil the entire Western world in a war. It's just what living with the Germans is like. I ought to know. This is heart-rendingly beautiful stuff. I have heard this referred to as the greatest volume of poetry in centuries. Certainly, when I have been in Germany, and also in Prague, oh my God, the young people in Prague knew this backwards and forwards. They knew it by heart and venerated it like nothing else. Like nothing else. And I agree. I see where it comes from. It absolutely is lovely. So there you go. Some poetry, some epics for the greatest books of all time. And I promise I am not going to neglect the next installment. The next installment will be around in due time, not forever from now. So I'll wrap this up for now, and I'll be back then. Thank you, BookTube.